Started right for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest, holistic feeding specialist helping families decode picky eating at the root. One of her advocacy, no other than Miss Lena Livinsky.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Welcome, Miss Lena on Book 101 Review. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Absolutely. So, I'm a holistic feeding specialist and a pediatric speech and pathologist. And what I do is I help moms of picky eaters finally understand that what their child's body is asking for in a way that kind of brings peace back into their home. Because having a picky eater oftentimes is can be very overwhelming. And a lot of the advice out there is focusing kind of on the behaviors of the child, just taking out their bite, and maybe trying to get them to eat different foods, which is definitely valid in some ways, but it's kind of missing this underlying reason for picky eating, which oftentimes stems from biology or nervous system dysregulation or different things happening in the body, because we have to remember that picky eating is actually a symptom. It's not a diagnosis. So that's what I do on every day, and I'm very passionate about this. And yeah.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And Miss Lena, thank you. And today let's talk about the deeper reasons behind picky eating and how to decode your child's symptoms. Let's reframe the term itself. Picky eating, a behavioral choice, or is it often a symptom of underlying biological or neurological difference? How should parents think about differently?
Yes. So I actually created a framework around this just to make it a little bit easier for parents and to break it down. It's called the Bloom framework. So it kind of looks at these five different areas. And at the root of everything is connection and nervous system regulation. Because when our kids are in this fight or flight mode, it's really hard for them to feel safe enough to eat. And eating is it's a very it's very involved, right? So this is
Hmm.
not something you can do when you're really stressed out. Even that happens to us as adults, right? If we're not feeling well, our appetite kind of dwindles. If we're stressed out, it goes either way. Sometimes you can be kind of like a binge eater, or you can be a picky eater where you're just like, I don't want to eat right now because I'm stressed out. And that's a very normal human response. So that happens to our kids as well. So that's at the root of what I do, always looking at the connection and nervous system regulation piece. And then we look at the five different areas of the Bloom framework. So we look at the biology, right? Looking at balanced health, making sure there is nothing going on underneath, kind of like in terms of their health, right? So it could be things like nutritional deficiencies, that are out of balance. There could be things like kind of like a chronic disease or medical diagnosis that's impacting feeding. So we want to look at this from this health perspective to make sure our kids are healthy, and try to help them that way. Because if they're having some kind of symptoms there, or maybe they have reflux or something, and it's making them uncomfortable when they're eating, this is something we want to address at least as much as we can. Then we look at the learned oral motor skills. So we look at their swallowing, making sure they're swallowing safely. We look at their chewing abilities. We're looking at how long they're eating. Is their tongue moving properly? Things like that to ensure there is not some kind of disability there. So they might need help with. We look at their microbiome, their optimal microbiome, because even though the study of the microbiome is kind of in the infancy stages right now, we do know that it really highly influences our eating and our brain, right? The gut brain connection is very real. So it's going to influence how we feel about eating. It's going to influence our appetite. It's going to influence our cravings, because if we have gut dysbiosis and there is a ton of overgrowth in our gut, then that can influence our cravings, and we're going to crave things that are sweet and carbs. So that's something we want to be mindful of. We want to give kids opportunities to explore in a safe way, so that we're not kind of forcing them to eat, but giving them an environment to eat. and feel comfortable about that. And then we also want to set boundaries at the tables. So those are kind of the five areas I look at when I work with picky eaters.
What are the most common misconceptions parents have actually escalate and typically picky eating power struggle at the dinner table, Miss Luna?
Yeah, so there is a few. I think the struggle at the dinner table, it can be very, first of all, stressful to parents because it's usually after work and people are just trying to get through the meal and connect with their kids and have their kids fed. So there is a few misconceptions there in terms of what we hear kind of in the society around maybe the things that kids are going to grow out of this. And some kids do, some kids go through a phase, but many of them don't. In fact, 1 in 4 kids goes on to be a true picky eater for their life. So this is something that's kind of a big statistic. That's 25% of kids, and I think that statistic is actually bigger than what's being reported. And that statistics goes up to 80% of kids who have some kind of diagnosis or a disability. So you're thinking autism, ADHD. So it's very prevalent. So when I hear the advice that don't worry about it, kids are going to grow out of it, it kind of goes against this intuition that unfortunately kids are struggling right now. So things like that should be addressed. So I think hearing the kind of messaging can send mixed signals to parents and can end up in frustration around the table, around the dinner table in general, because they're expecting their kids to just grow out of it, but there have like a true issue, so there can be conflict right there, right?
A conflict, definitely. And solve that conflict, people also, when does a selective eating across the line from a common developmental phase into a more significant issue that might need professional support? What are the red flags, Miss
Yeah,
Lena?
there are honestly quite a few. If your child is generally fatigued around the table and they're struggling to finish their meals, they're taking a very long time, then that's something I would definitely escalate to take a look at their oral motor skills, making sure they're swallowing safely. That is definitely something that I think is a big red flag. If they're consistently struggling with meals throughout the day, so it's not just like one particular food they don't like, but it's just overall kind of like a negative association with food. That's a red flag for me. If they're having some kind of maybe a behavior after eating. Maybe they're having, for example, they eat something that is going to agitate them, and down the road, they're going to have a behavior after. Then that's something that's probably medically happening, and we want to look at maybe allergies. So there is a bunch of red flags when it comes to that. A lot of it is kind of emotional association with food. A lot of it is behavior around food. If there's really a lot of negativity, a lot of stress around the table. If you, as a parent, are struggling where you're stressed and you have to be like a short ordered cook where you have to make special food for your child every single time, that's a red flag, right? Because what we generally want from a young eater is to just have what we're having, even if they don't eat every single component of the dinner, but they should be able to eat majority of it. That's what we want to see with our eaters. And if a child, you need to make them just something special every time, then probably that's a sign of picky eating. Also, just having a very limited diet where they're only eating maybe less than 20 foods or less than 30 foods. Some kids are on a beige diet. So that's things like chicken nuggets, fries, just bread. They're eating mostly carbs and very little protein and fat. That's usually a sign of picky eating as well.
Interesting, and something need to ponder, Miss Lena. And let's talk about the why behind behavior or decoding the symptoms. Beyond taste, what are the primary sensory system foods feel overwhelming or even threatening to a child?
Honestly, every single sense is involved in eating, right? Because we might smell the food when it's being cooked in the kitchen, then we see the food. We have to touch the food before it even enters our mouth, right? We have to pick it up somehow, even if it's with a fork, or we have to interact with it. Then you have the taste, um, and proprioception in general. So all of it is very much involved. So if there is any type of heightened sensitivity around any one of these senses, it might impact eating. And I've seen that. I actually worked with a child in the past who would gag just by looking at even Play-Doh, not even food. It's just like looking at Play-Doh and elongating Play-Doh. He would gag just because of the visual, because that's how sensitive he was. Um, so that happens to kids. So, and oftentimes I have to tell you, when there are sensory sensitivities, there's typically nutritional deficiencies behind it. Zinc is a very, very big one. Magnesium, iron, things like that. These are things we want to look at. And also the gut microbiome. It's all very connected when it comes to sensory issues.
How can a child's oral motor skills, the physical mechanics of chewing and swallowing, play a major and often overlooked role in food refusal, Miss Lena?
Yeah, well, when we're thinking about eating, it's a developmental skill. When we're learning how to eat, we're learning how to chew, we're learning how to taste our food. It's something that happens. There is a gradual hierarchy there. And if there is any type of kind of breakdown during that process, kind of like with walking, right? Until you walk, you have to go through different phrases, different phases of development, whether it's crawling, whether it's kind of navigating and walking along the couch and things like that. And you're going to have a lot of bumps on the road and a lot of falls in the meantime. And the same thing happens with feeding, with eating. So until you can chew in a rotary manner, kind of like an adult, you have to go through different little chewing steps. And if there's any type of breakdown there, and it could happen for many reasons, it could be because the child's muscles are weak in some way, there's any type of weakness. Sometimes kids develop fear around foods because maybe they gagged or they choked a little bit on something, and then they're afraid to explore foods in that manner, so it becomes an issue for them. So it's either oftentimes it's around anxiety, and oftentimes it's around lack of skill or kind of like a missing milestone somewhere. So this is something, if you're considering that with your child, where you're noticing like, oh, maybe they're holding on to food for a long time, maybe they're chewing for a very long time, maybe they're pocketing food, and you're noticing where you're kind of nervous, like, oh, I'm not going to give them this steak because I don't think they can handle chewing it, and they have all of their teeth and they're old enough to be able to eat it, then I would definitely refer to a speech language pathologist to look at the underlying skills that they have when it comes to chewing, because that is definitely a red flag.
A red flag indeed. So let's talk about the anxiety and control. For a child feeling anxious in other areas of life, how can a dinner table become a stage where they assert the only control they have?
Oh, for sure. I mean, if you think about it, oftentimes our kids are coming in from school where they don't have a lot of control over what they're doing. And when they're younger, the parents are the ones who set up their environment. They're the ones who control a lot of the decisions. So oftentimes for a child like this who has anxiety around food or some kind of negative associations or is struggling in any one of those bloom areas I have mentioned, they might try and take control of something. And oftentimes that happens at the table, right? So whether that is what I'm going to eat, whether it's how much I'm going to eat, whether it's just wanting to eat dessert, whatever it is, the table is a perfect kind of stage to take control. And I often talk about this with parents. So, what I like to do, actually, one of the advice I give parents is to give kind of the illusion of control, but in a way that they can explore in a safe way and still have an option to kind of build their skills as a picky eater. So what I like to say is to start doing kind of shared family meals, kind of tapa style. So you have different plates of foods that mom or dad get to control what's actually on the table, but then the child gets to control what goes on their actual plate. And it's kind of a nice step of desensitizing them to some of these issues they're having around food, and giving them control over what goes on their plate, but still controlling what's on the table overall.
Definitely interesting. So let's talk about the gut brain connection. How might digestive discomfort or reflux or food sensitivities manifest as a strong aversions of fear of eating? Miss Lena.
Well, a lot of our emotions and neurotransmitters are produced in the gut, right? So our happy feel hormone, which is serotonin, and these different types of neurotransmitters, they're actually responsible for our emotions, and a lot of them affect eating. So when we're dealing with overgrowth or a leaky gut or anything happening in the gut that is going to um, that's going to influence our emotions in a way that can also influence our feeding preferences, right? Because our
Mm-hmm.
appetite is processed there. Um, Kind of how we feel about food. A lot of anxiety happens, stems from that, oftentimes around food. Our preferences, our cravings stem from our gut. So, whenever we're dealing with microbiome issues, just gut dysbiosis, leaky gut, overgrowths. Because when we eat our food, we don't actually eat our food. The bacteria in our gut eats our food. So if we have these bad guys, so-called bad guys in the gut that are really craving the bad things, it's going to influence our flavor profiles. It's going to influence our cravings for food. So we're going to crave more just carbs and foods that are, and sweets and sugar. So foods that are going to feed those bad guys versus the good bacteria in our gut, just because there's this overgrowth, there's this imbalance in our gut. So it influences it greatly, from cravings to our emotions around food. So that's why it's so important to look at the gut of your child and to look for any red flags or do gut testing to see what is really happening there, whether there are pathogens there that need to be treated, whether you don't have enough good bacteria and need to take some specific probiotics for that. And then try and regulate your diet, which is hard for picky eaters oftentimes, but there's definitely ways around it where you can add in some beneficial foods to their diet without having to change their diet a ton, in a way that they can handle it. So it's definitely important to look at that connection.
Miss Lena, as a holistic feeding specialist, what are your short-term and long-term goals?
In my business or personally?
Yes, please.
Business. Okay. Well, I love working with parents one on one. When I first started my career, I've been working with feeding for over 13 years, but it's always been patient specific, client specific. So I worked as a therapist, working with the kids to help them to be more comfortable around food and working on their behaviors. And my perspective has completely shifted on that. And now I focus on working with parents, because I believe that's where we can make the biggest change when it comes to picky eating. Because if we don't make specific changes at home and we only focus on behavior, like I said in the beginning, we're not going to make much progress with our picky eaters because we're not actually addressing the root cause of what's happening. So my goal is to continue working one-on-one with parents, eventually offer group coaching because then I can work with more people, and just offer programs on my website where it's kind of easy for the overwhelmed parent to take and learn from it so they can apply the changes I recommend at home to actually see some change with their child. Because my goal overall is to not to overwhelm the parent because picky eating can already be overwhelming and our lives are overwhelming. So I want it to be accessible and I want it to be easy enough changes you implement at home where it doesn't have to feel like another added to-do list item. So that's my goal.
Good luck to your goals, Miss Lena. Looking forward for more success. And what will be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be like you?
Um, so to work with picky eaters or to,
Yes, to
yes,
be like
okay.
specialist.
Okay, perfect. So I do have to say that, working with kids one on one for so many years definitely built up my skills a ton because I think if I didn't understand children from that lens, it would be hard for me to coach parents because I couldn't relate. And also, I have my son who's a picky eater. So he has taught me a ton. So I do say, if you're a speech language pathologist, if that's the route you have taken, I would recommend you work with feeding clients first, just to understand it from that perspective. So you can observe, you can learn how to work with the child, you can learn to look for red flags, you can learn to observe their oral motor skills and how to work with them if they have some kind of issues there, and swallowing as well. That's really important, I think, to understand before you can coach parents, because if you don't, then there could be this disconnect. But from there, I definitely would recommend learning more about the holistic aspect of health and uh, root cause thinking, and learning about nervous system regulation and taking courses around that, because I think it's really important for us to understand every single area that I have mentioned, right? That nervous system area, also looking at the microbiome, looking at their biology and their health in general, their oral motor skills. So I think part of it will come from experience working with kids, and part of it will come from you doing your own research and your own studies. So I think in order to be kind of well rounded in this, is kind of looking at all of these areas to see where you have gaps in knowledge. So then you can kind of take courses or learn on the job, and from there, once you feel a little bit more confident about it, you can definitely pursue something like this because we need you. More and more kids are picky eaters, and I don't think we have enough help out there. I don't think enough clinicians understand what it takes to actually work with picky eating, because in school, oftentimes we learn about the behavior aspect of picky eating, which is a part of it, like I said, but it's just a little part of it. And if we don't address the whole child, we're going to struggle. So I do hope more people go into this field because we need more and more people, because our kids are only getting sicker, unfortunately. And hopefully that will change down the line.
Yes, definitely. So, Miss Lena, thank you for that advice. And can you please recommend a book that implements your journey?
Yeah. So when I was working as an SLP, a lot of my reading or a lot of trainings I took were from Melanie Podak. I really love her approach to pediatric feeding. She's a pediatric feeding expert and an author. She has wonderful teaching materials, and I really loved her book Responsive Feeding: The Baby's First Guide to Stress-Free Weaning, Healthy Eating, and Mealtime Bonding, because that book really looked at the child kind of as a whole, as kind of helping them develop in a way that's well rounded and healthy, with healthy nervous system regulation and bonding and connection. And that was kind of my introduction into that topic. And another book that really comes to mind for me, and I absolutely love Dr. Elisa Song and her teachings, and I'm part of her provider mastermind group. So I get to learn from her every month. And she has an amazing book called Healthy Kids, Happy Kids. And a lot of it talks about immune health, but more so gut health in general. She teaches about the microbiome. She's one of the main people I have learned from. And she really is great at breaking it down for parents and to understand gut health a little bit more. So I'm a big fan of her book. Again, Healthy Kids, Happy Kids. And at the end of the book, she also breaks down many different sicknesses. So if your child has the flu, or if your child has pink eye, you can look back in her book for a guide from this integrative pediatrician perspective. So you can look at what kind of remedies you can use that are kind of more naturally minded. You can look at homeopathy. You can look at even acupressure points that she recommends for many different sicknesses. So it's an amazing book to have as a parent. So I definitely recommend that.
Thank you for the recommended books, Miss Lena. And tell us, siblings can complicate things. How can parents navigate one child's need for a low pressure approach while managing comments or comparisons from siblings?
That's a really good question. I always take it back to connection. So connecting with the children kind of at the level where they are. Because if they're making nagging comments, they're frustrated about some things, that's probably stemming from something else. So when we take a step back and we start to observe our children and really connect with them, and at whatever level there are, whether that's through play, whether that's through conversation, whether that's through just spending more time with them and observing, I think that's going to help you figure out where that's coming from.
Yes, definitely. And before we wrap up our discussion for today, Miss Lena, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy
Oh my
101
goodness.
in eighth, third season, and more food 101 in sixth season as well. Geography 101, love letters, movie 101, review music 101, a fourth season, science 101, sex 101, and it's a third season of my baby podcast, trivia 101, law 101, mental health 101, motivation 101, entrepreneurship 101, and
Wow.
Bible verses 101.
Oh my
Please
goodness,
listen
you
to
do a lot.
that.
That's amazing.
Thank
Congratulations.
Thank you. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Miss Lena, if you could leave parents with one core mindset shift or first step to move from frustration to understanding, what would it be?
Just connect with your children. Just observe. Take a step back. Just put your to-do list aside and just connect with them at the level where they are, because that's the first step, I believe, for children to feel safer to eat, to feel like to come so they can come out of this fight or flight. Because if we're kind of yelling at them to eat or trying to bribe them or setting all these rules around the table, that's a very stressful environment. And oftentimes our pick eaters, they're a little bit more sensitive. So I would say just connect, take a step back, and try to figure out where this is coming from. Because once you do take a step back, oftentimes you start to notice patterns, right? Maybe they're eating a really long time. Maybe they have a stomach ache after they eat every time. Maybe there is something else going on. There's anxiety. So that just gives you the space to really observe and get to figure out what's going on.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to
Absolutely.
Miss Lena. Thank you. And can you please invite our listeners to support your advocacy, your business, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Yes. So I do offer one-on-one coaching right now, and you can find more information about that on my website, lenalivinsky.com. You can actually get on a free call with me for 30 minutes to even just see if we're a good match to work together, because I think it's important to be a good match. So you can, yeah, sign up for that on my website, lenalivinsky.com. And also, I'm pretty active on Instagram. So if you want to send me a DM, if you have any questions, you can find me there. And that's at lena.livinsky.
Yes, I have a new podcast coming, Coaching 101. Will you be part of it, Miss Lena? And let's talk about coaching itself.
Sure. Yeah, I'd
Please
love
do
to.
come
Thank
over.
you for, yeah, I'd love to be on there. Thank you.
Yes, you're most welcome. Yes, people, let's support Miss Lena Livinsky because if you support her, for sure, more and more empowering, holistic feeling will rise. So, Miss Lena, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast.
Bodycom people, see you soon.